How pirate crews kept their captains honest. Pirates were, by definition, outlaws. They had rejected the legal authority of every nation that might claim jurisdiction over them: England, Spain, France, the Netherlands, and then, on their own ships, some of them wrote constitutions. Some of the most carefully governed workplaces of the early 18th century were ships crewed by men whom every navy in the Atlantic had hunted and hanged. What made this possible was not a shared political philosophy. Pirates were not idealists. The question is more practical than that. How did a crew of armed criminals at sea with no courts and no law stop their own captain from simply taking everything? The Golden Age of Piracy ran roughly from 1650 to 1730. During those decades, pirate ships operated entirely outside any state's legal protection or enforcement. A captain could not call a court if his men mutinied. A crewman could not sue if he was cheated. The law was not available to either of them. Think about what that meant for the captain's position. His authority depended entirely on the crew's willingness to follow him. There was no institution behind him, no fleet, no rank that anyone was required to respect, and a crewman was in an equally precarious position. He had signed onto a voyage with armed strangers. If the captain decided to shortchange him at the end, there was no magistrate to complain to, no recourse at all. On a voyage that might last months and end in death, the only thing holding the enterprise together was agreement among the people on the ship. That practical necessity, not ideology, produced some of the period's most unusual governance arrangements. Some pirate crews adopted written articles before a voyage began. These were not political manifestos. They were working contracts. The articles defined how loot would be divided. They specified what each role was responsible for, how crew members were expected to conduct themselves, and what would happen if someone violated the terms. Not every crew had them. The practice was not universal. But among the crews that did, everyone aboard signed or marked the document before the ship left port. That act of signing mattered. It turned unspoken expectations into written rules, rules that existed independently of whatever the captain happened to want and that any crew member could point to. The articles were not the captain's prerogative to write or rewrite. They were agreed before the voyage, signed by the crew, and binding on everyone. The articles did more than set rules. They established roles. And one role in particular was designed to serve as a structural counterweight to the captain. The Termaster managed the loot. He kept accounts of what a prize ship was worth, oversaw what was taken, and controlled how the proceeds were distributed to the crew. The captain commanded during battle and navigation. The Termaster commanded what happened to the money. These were not the same job, and the distinction was deliberate. Captains generally received a larger share than ordinary crew members, often something like 2 shares to a crew member's 1. But the ratio varied between crews and across the period, and historians cannot confirm the specifics for most cases. The articles in some crews also specified compensation for men injured in service. A common fund, defined before the voyage began, would pay out for specific wounds. The money was already allocated, at a destination before the captain ever touched the prize. The most direct constraint on a pirate captain was the simplest one. The crew could vote him out. This was not democracy in any modern sense. It was a practical mechanism for removing someone whose decisions were costing everyone else. A captain who hoarded, who cheated, or who endangered the ship for personal gain could find himself outvoted and removed. The crew could elect someone else. The voyage would continue, and the captain's tenure would not. The threat of removal didn't require an actual vote to function. It was always present. A captain who knew his authority was conditional tended to behave accordingly. None of this was uniform. Practices varied significantly between crews and across the period. What worked on one ship was not necessarily the rule on any other. The articles historians can study today come from a small number of well-documented crews. Whether those crews were representative or exceptional is genuinely unclear. Pirate crews were not modern democracies. Cooperation was a practical necessity, not a political conviction. The records are too thin to support broad conclusions. So how did pirate crews stop their captain from taking everything? Through a combination of written articles, a KBU Watermaster who controlled distribution independently of the captain, defined shares that existed before anyone touched the loot, and the formal ability to remove a captain by vote. The answer is institutional. The crew built structures that made unilateral seizure difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. This is what is unusual about pirate governance. Most governance exists because some external authority imposes it. These arrangements existed because nobody could impose anything. The crew had to solve the problem from the inside. What is remarkable is not that pirates had rules, it is that they needed them, and that in the absence of any courts, any navy, any external enforcement, they wrote their own. On a ship full of armed men in open water, the articles were the only law that would hold.
Tell us which of history's stories should be in crayon next. Comment below.